Let's go up to the other end of the country now, Bundaberg, where we're joined by Coalition MP Keith Pitt. Thanks for joining us, Keith.
Great to be with you, Chris. Another fantastic day in Queensland.
It's always perfect in Queensland, except when you've got floods or cyclones or bushfires or whatever. Give me a break. Now, tell us about this inquiry you've been involved in looking at nuclear energy for Australia. You do all the work, you look at the options, you suggest that perhaps governments ought to get rid of all the obstruction to this, and straight away the Energy Minister Angus Taylor slaps this down and says that the government can't do anything about allowing nuclear energy development in this country unless there is broad community acceptance and bipartisan support. How are you ever going to get bipartisan support from Labor for something like this?
Well, Chris, I think this is one of the fundamental problems the Labor Party has. Not only does it not represent working people anymore, it's against everything. They're against gas and gas exploration, and in Victoria that means that the price there doubles because you've got to pay transport for gas out of Queensland. They won't build dams to have traditional hydro.
Hang on a minute.
They don't want high efficiency, low emission coal.
Excuse me, Keith Pitt, before you just spend the whole time there bagging the Labor Party. My point is about the coalition being in government. You've got to do what you think is right, not hang it on the opposition and suggest you can't do anything unless they agree with you.
Not at all, but I mean, Labor has been just ridiculous on this in the last week. Mr Albanese suggested Fraser Island. I'm sure the Great Barrier Reef will be next for a location. But the government will respond to this report. Usually it's about 3 months after the report's put forward. There was a recommendation from the majority of the committee that the moratorium should be lifted for more modern technology. So that means not the things that were designed in the 50s and 60s, i.e. as in Chernobyl and other places, but certainly small modular reactors should be considered. Now, if you want zero emissions energy production and you want it from a reliable source, from technology which is utilised right around the world, well, this is the only game in town. We had plenty of activists come to the public hearings and suggest that you can run the country on wind and solar. My view is that that's just not practical. In fact, they're hanging their hat on some technology for batteries being developed over the next 10 years. Well, nuclear is already developed, it's already tested. Yes, you'll need to deal with the storage issues, but certainly more modern reactors have a different output in regards to what happened in the original Gen 1s or Gen 2s. I think it's a realistic option, but Angus is right, you do need the community to be on board. So we always wanted to have a conversation with the Australian people, and that conversation continues.
Well, when it comes to Labor's point of view, of course, the late, great former Prime Minister Bob Hawke, very much on the record in recent years suggesting nuclear energy should be examined in this country, should be pursued in this country. And the South Australian Labor government back when Jay Weatherill and Mike Ram were in charge had a good look at this. Don't you need, in the end, a state government to embrace this and decide that they're going to back this in and see if they can get something done? I mean, South Australia would have been the obvious location. Of course, it exports a lot of uranium yellow cake from Roxby Downs. It has the infrastructure in place, the energy transmission infrastructure in place if it wanted to build a reactor in Spencer Gulf. It was looking at the economic opportunities from storing nuclear waste as well, but that's been kicked into touch, and the coalition government there now won't have a look at it either.
Well, the South Australian Royal Commission, one of its recommendations was that the federal moratorium should be lifted. Now, the House of Reps Environment and Energy Committee has recommended a partial lifting of the moratorium for more modern reactors, and in particular small modular reactors. But once again, we do need the states and local government to be on board. But I think the big difference around SMRs is that they don't need to be located near large bodies of water. They don't have to be at the coast. You can certainly put them in other places, and I think there would be regional towns out there who would be quite happy to have a $5, $6 or $10 billion piece of infrastructure in their backyard that provides jobs and reliable energy.
But are they viable right now, or is this technology that is still being proven up?
Well, the order book is open for a company called NewScale. That was the evidence that they provided to us. They are taking orders for SMRs. For example, a 60 megawatt small modular reactor is around the size of a B-double truck. That's how it was described to us. In fact, their belief is that the US Energy Agency that does these assessments has gone from an exclusion zone of 10 miles down to the fence of the facility, the fence line of the facility. So I think in terms of the levels of safety, the safeguards, the fail-safes, all the things associated with that engineering piece of infrastructure, I think have improved out of sight.
So what do you think is going to happen here? You're obviously very keen on this. You've done the work. But is the government, your government colleagues, are they just going to decide to delay on this and not proceed any further?
Chris, it's not a matter of whether I'm keen on it or not. I think it's just a practical solution to the problem that's before us that will work. I mean, we can't have the nation covered in solar panels when there is no plan on how to dispose of them. We can't have the nation covered in football fields worth of batteries when we're not sure how long they'll last and what to do with them when they're finished. And certainly we need energy that works all of the time. You can't have the entire Australian economy rely on the weather. We know what happens if we do that. So, look, I think there is a real opportunity here. It'll be up to the executive to respond to the report, but I think there has been a quantum shift in terms of public support, and I'm sure that debate will continue for the next few months.
Well, there should be. I mean, anybody out there, the green activists, the sort of climate activists we talk about all the time on this program, and I tend to disagree with so often because of their single focus. I mean, they ought to be embracing this. If emissions reduction is your goal, then nuclear energy has to be part of the solution. It's obviously working very effectively in a lot of other countries around the world. It's incredible, really, when you look at it, because often we're presented with intractable problems for governments around the world. And if the problem here is to have emissions-free energy and reliable energy, it's one of the few problems. People tying themselves in knots over this at the moment. It's one of the few problems where there is actually a silver bullet. The silver bullet is nuclear energy.
Well, I mean, there's certainly, the Greens in other countries are very supportive of nuclear. But as I made the point earlier, Chris, we have a Labor Party that's against gas, it's against hydro, it's against nuclear, it's against Healy coal, all of which will reduce emissions. And they want to leave us with intermittent wind and solar, which simply can't run the nation and its industries. So I think we need to look hard at solutions into the future. This is a long-term prospect, that there will be no reactors built in this country in the near to mid-term, would be my view. But we also need to build that technology aspect, and that means through our universities and all of those technical support individuals that you need for this industry. But no one will do that whilst a moratorium exists. No one will invest money in terms of looking at designs whilst there is no option to deliver that type of technology into this country.
Did you get any evidence from environmentalists supporting nuclear energy? There are some in this country. The one that I know I've interviewed on radio in the past is a bloke by the name of Barry Brook. He was with Adelaide University. I think he might be in Tasmania now, but he is full on with the climate change challenge. He was very forward-leaning on that, so much so, in fact, that he says we ought to look at nuclear energy because it's the only way to make dramatic cuts in carbon dioxide emissions.
Oh, there were certainly plenty of people who I'd probably tag as activists who made submissions to the public hearings and certainly made written submissions. But when you really talk to them and say, well, you're happy to have your costs for electricity increase by 400%, 500%, 600%. I remember one individual in particular in Western Australia said, well, she couldn't simply afford that. So I think this is the point we need to make. We need to have a factual discussion. But once again, Anthony Albanese is out there running a scare campaign, and I saw him on Sky not that long ago saying, well, where are you going to put it, Launceston or Hobart? Well, I think all of those discussions, it's far too premature, but I think there are locations in Australia that would be interested.
Yeah, Marrickville, for instance. Albo's electorate. I don't think you could. I think the Inner West Council in Sydney is probably a nuclear-free zone. Now, tell me, what do you make of these green activists and activist journalists who seem to be intent on criticising Scott Morrison for taking a holiday while there are some bushfires burning in New South Wales? They're comparing this. Get this. They're comparing this to Christine Nixon, who was the police commissioner in Victoria, while she was supposed to be on duty oversighting the battle against a firestorm that destroyed whole communities and killed over 170 people in Black Saturday in Victoria. They're comparing her deserting the post to go and have dinner and talk about her biography. They're relating that to a Prime Minister having holidays while there are bushfires in New South Wales. Give us your thoughts on that.
Well, I think it's all about direct responsibility. We obviously have ministers still in place, the executive is still in place, And the Prime Minister, to be frank, Chris, politics, there's a price to pay for political life and public life, and it's paid for by families. The PM has a young family, his children are not of adult age, and I don't think it's unreasonable to expect that he can spend some time with them. Now, I have no idea what he's up to. He doesn't ring me to check his diary each day, but I do know that it's very tough in public life for everyone from all types of life, whether you are on our side or whether you're on the Labor side, that we all have similar challenges. So I don't think it's unreasonable that an individual, regardless of whether you're the PM or otherwise, can take some time off to spend time with your family.
Yeah, but
and I think that's actually important.
Sorry to interrupt again, Keith. I don't think anyone would disagree with that. Everybody thinks he's got to have a holiday at some time. I would have thought now is the perfect time for a holiday in the lead up to Christmas when things slow down a bit. But these people are trying to trump up the New South Wales bushfires as a national crisis. They're actually calling it a national crisis, a national emergency that requires the direct attention of the Prime Minister.
Well, emergency services always run through the states. As I said earlier, direct responsibility for the example you gave in Victoria did live with that particular individual. We can't be all things to all people. People have to do the role with which they're tasked, and that is what happens when we deal with whether it's a flood, whether it's a cyclone or whether it's a fire. There's some very hard-working volunteers out there right now. I give them my utmost respect. I've stood in front of a few before myself, Chris, and it's not a pleasant experience.
Absolutely.
But they're doing what they have to, and we've got a fire right here at Bundaberg now, which is not far away from the township. But look, on the PM, everyone's entitled to a break. It's up to them when they make that decision on when to go. And I just think this, faux outrage from activists, it's got a lot to be responsible for. We all cop a fair pasting from social media and other outlets. People get led along by this type of media harassment, and I just think it's wrong. It's difficult enough to get people into public life now, and I think it'll be even more difficult if they think their families will continue to be attacked by those who are trying to score political points. Yeah,
faux outrage indeed, but picked up by the Canberra Press Gallery, predictably, which is pretty ordinary. But thanks so much for joining us, Keith. Appreciated chatting to you throughout the year. Hope you have a good Christmas and New Year.
Great with you, viewers. Have a great Christmas.
Keith Pitt there.